Hey, John Gilroy here. Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. I think we should maybe turn the tables here and talk about something of real value, the software supply chain. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, a podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator in the virtual studio today. We have Javed Hasan. He's a co-founder and CEO of a company called Lineaje, Lineaje. Javed, how are you?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you for inviting me.
So I was at the Billington event, kind of walking around, going from room to room, and I walked in this one room. I think Javed was up on, it was standing room only. I thought he was giving away $100 bills or something, but he's something much more valuable. He was giving away information on how to manage the supply chain, which is really important for software in the federal government. So I said, well, let's get this guy in here. And there are people in the D.C. area that may have heard of you, not heard of you, but maybe tell your story and see how they can connect up. So give us a thumbnail sketch. Javed, I went to your LinkedIn profile, and you've got about 10 pages in there. Just give me maybe a 30-second background and why you started this company.
Yeah, so, I've been in the Silicon Valley for a long time. And over the last 20 years, I've worked on cybersecurity. And, so I was fortunate enough to work at two big companies, Symantec and McAfee. And luckily for me, twice each, till they ceased to exist and became Broadcom and Trellix. And, so as I was thinking about the future, one of the things you do in Silicon Valley is you do startups. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't done one. I've been on the corporate side. I had not done a startup. So we thought about an idea that we had and decided to build Lineaje.
And we're going to talk about the software supply chain here. The question is this whole concept of post-breach forensics and what it's all about. And so there seems to be so how do you prevent something from coming into your supply chain from bringing software into your system?
So, the clue is in the name of the company, Lineaje. So, if you think of it, so Lineaje is about the lineage of software, trying to answer the question, where does your software come from? And of course, where does it come from? It comes from the software supply chain. And over the last 10 years, we pull more and more components from outside when we build modern applications. So today, we know organizations where even 99% of components come from outside. And they're opaque and they're risky. And on an average, about 70% of all components come from outside. So our developers are assembling more software as opposed to writing code for everything they do. The other interesting thing, and you started with AI, and as you sort of think about AI coding assistants, what are they doing? They're writing code for organizations, not written by humans. So again, the percentage of code that essentially is generated or comes from outside is increasing. It's opaque, it's risky, it's unknown. So how do you now make that safe? And that is the charter of Lineaje.
Good. Well, in Washington, D.C. here, some people touch on the subject, but I don't think they give enough attention to it. But from your vantage point there, is federal policy moving fast enough to address this issue, or is it still behind the curveball?
I mean, it's interesting that I think the federal policy actually kicked off the supply chain market, in my point of view. So President Biden created what is called the Executive Order 14028, which is about software bills of materials and knowing what the ingredients of your software. And he mandated it that it be applied by all government and federal departments so that they knew the exact risks that are being ingested and know the exact components in software. So, it was a good start. And then the implementation has gone on for a long time now, since 2021 to 2026, 5 years. So things have moved. Things are continuing to move along. We are very optimistic about the space. And we see, AI, like I said, adding to the fuel to the fire from a market perspective. So the government is moving pretty well on this. 5 years is a small amount of time in the federal government. So things have come a very long way, and effectively they have created the market. The second big thing is because the US federal government moved, we are seeing the same movement globally. So we are seeing other countries. So the European Union has followed. Middle East is following through with that. Singapore is following through with that. Japan is following through. India is following through. So we're seeing this cascading need where the software supply chain has become a critical factor. for multiple countries, multiple geographies, and of course the US federal government. Taking of the market goes to the US federal government, in my view.
SBOM, software bill of materials, I think most people know what that is. But in the federal government, traditionally what happens is many leaders rely on checkbox options. Well, this checkbox is good. Well, that checkbox is good. That checkbox is good. But I think the key to understanding an SBOM is to having almost like it's like a living unit, isn't it? I mean, it's something that's going on right now. It's not just a checkbox, but it's hard to convince people to incorporate that into their thinking, isn't it?
It is pretty hard, right? And so, and we try to make it more real. So if you're going to buy a car, so you buy a 50,000 BMW, and you don't know where its components come from. You don't know where the tires come from. You know where the seats come from. You will not spend 50K for an unknown car bill of materials, right? Of course, they come from the car supply chain, right? Now we spend $1 million. The federal government spends millions and billions of dollars on software. And if they don't know the ingredients, which is the SBOM, it's very hard to know how well made it is. And I think that's the basic, so all of us relate to it. And I think that's the magic of software bills of materials. And of course, the magic also lies in how you use it, how you understand it, how you use it to build better software.
So, Javed, if we're sitting on a plane, we start bring up a conversation, talk about Washington, D.C. You're a California guy. Go, hey, Javed, you don't understand here in Washington, D.C., we got air gap networks. We got this old legacy stuff that's like 1 million years old. We got, this classified information. We've got regulations. We've got all kinds of things. And so, how do you design the federal requirements into Lineage?
So there's a very interesting logic. So I'll start with, so we are on a plane, we are talking. So I'll give you I'll give you the problem. So if you sort of start thinking about the world in two stages, one is how software is run, and software is being run in air-gapped environments, to your point, right? And so there's a certain amount of security that is there because of that. And so, highly secure environments. The modern world is in the public cloud, right? In AWS, Azure, OCI, so on and so forth. Now, the problem of the other part of it, though, is how software is built. Now, if you think of it, software is assembled outside the air-gapped environments. So if you think of it, if I wanted to compromise you, and this is the challenge of the software supply chain, I could compromise you outside your air-gapped environment, right? And be deployed inside. So the insecurity is already built, is brought into my secure environments because the software supply chain brought it in, right? So, and that has been the challenge with the software supply chain, that software components are built everywhere, right? And in 70% of the cases, they come from what is called open source software. And open source software is built globally, right? And about 70% of it is anonymously, let's say, committed by developers who don't necessarily even tell their name.
Yeah.
Right. So now you have a large amount of code that is going into your new environments that are supposed to be very secure, but that may potentially already been compromised or at least is opaque. So that is creating the security challenge for the federal government. So the interesting thing for us was, the first customer we got was the US Air Force. And so what we showed them, and this was about 3 months into Lineage, and that's one of the things we were showing in Billington when you saw us, is that we can decompose software, find its entire supply chain. But the most important thing we can do from a federal perspective, all of these people who committed code into these millions of lines of code, we can discover their geo-provenance. So I can take an application and tell you what part comes from Russia, what comes from China, what comes from Iran, what comes from here, what comes from there, right? That does not mean it's malicious, but now you couple it with an analysis of the software that we do, which is where are its inherent risks. So it has vulnerabilities, it has code quality issues, and so on. Now we can map those to geos and people, right? And so we give amazing insight for, think of it as high-end software, right? So think of it, what we call critical software, important software, right? So if you're a large software development company like Cisco or Pure Storage, you use us. If you're a large bank like Fannie Mae, so on and so forth, you use us.
Yeah.
If you're building critical software for the US Air Force, Marine Corps, so on and so forth, you use us, right?
Yeah.
So we go at that high end of the market to solve to essentially create clean supply chains that meet your expectations.
So if I'm sitting on another plane talking to someone else and they tell me, what's this Lineage all about? And I said, well, it's like a DNA test for your software, which is what it is. It's like
Yeah.
23andMe for your code. Well, this is where you can do whatever you want with it. If I'm from who knows where, I mean, who cares? But that's the idea of having a DNA test. At least you know something about where the origin is, huh?
That's a great comment. The first name of the company, even though very, very few people know it, was VDNA, virtual DNA. And we sort of played around with it, and then we sort of said, no, Lineage is a better name,
Yeah.
right? But exactly your point now, to take the conversation further, right? So think of it that we generate the SBOM and essentially put about 108 attributes together for every component, can detect changes and tampers and all kinds of insights. So now you get this visibility,
Yeah.
right? But finding issues is easy. So what do you do about it? And that is actually the magic of Lineage. How do you source safe, secure, open source, which is not vulnerable, which meets your expectations? So it's very easy to tell you what the problems are, but the magic is, of course, in eliminating them before you consume them.
You mentioned the Air Force before. I love talking from the Air Force. I was talking to
Hmm.
some guy, and he said this C-130 is like, I don't know, 640 sensors, and it does a gigabyte of data every minute, and there's all kinds of information. And he said the big problem is just trying to find out where these sensors are. And so maybe you answer that question, but the question is like, so how do you even find out where all this open source software is in your system? I mean, you almost have to be very careful about at the beginning from where you start, don't you?
Yes, so, and this is where the software bills of materials is interesting because what we can do is because we can decompose your software and find all of its ingredients slash open source components also. Then we know what open source you use. So in a very vast world of open source with 175 million packages, right? How do you find the 10,000 that a company or an organization is using? We find
Yeah.
those based on the software bill of materials, right? And then you go and say, okay, how risky is it? What do you want to know about it? So we can generate pretty detailed reports, right? So we can essentially today take a very large organization, decompose all of its applications, and generate an assessment report in about 3 days. So think of it. So I can take these big software development organizations and show them where their software components come from and what kind of risk is inherently in there. So that's one. Then the second point then is what do you do with, let's say, like we said, 70% of it is open source and it's opaque and risky. So the first thing we do is we bring transparency to it. So you know where the code
Mm-hmm.
came from, what vulnerabilities are there, so on and so forth. And then we have done something more magical. So I can generate safe versions of those open source at scale. So this is the magic of Silicon Valley when you tie technology to real life problems, right? So what we can now do is we can create what we call gold open source. So gold open
Mm-hmm.
source is malware free, vulnerability free, fully attested, so you know everything about it, every tamper and so on, and put together at scale in our cloud and delivered to any software development organization securely into their Artifactory, right? So now have your developers build on trusted code, even though it comes from
Mm-hmm.
outside, it has gone through both a filter on its reputation and a fixing of the violations so that all your source code or your supply chain is now finally secure, right? So you not only do you know
Javed,
your software bill of materials, now you have sources. We have basically fixed the suppliers as well.
You've been around a while. 30 years ago in Silicon Valley, they'd always say, hey, it's going gold. Remember, Windows 95, it's going
Yes.
gold, and Microsoft is going gold. That was the phrase. And now we're kind of taking it back from 3 decades ago. It's open source gold. So at least people like you and me understand the origin of that phrasing. It's not anything to do with money. It's got to do with back when Microsoft was releasing their gold version. It was a big deal.
Age has its benefits, John, right? So we
Yeah.
go, right? So exactly the point, right? Gold. And then you go and say there was a definite definition of gold when Microsoft versions went gold.
I remember.
We should have the same expectations from open source, right? That you should use
Yes.
gold versions, and extending that as we build new AI systems with new LLMs, new MCP servers, we should have the expectation that we use gold LLMs, we use gold,
Yeah.
MCP
We'll have to.
servers, and so on and so forth, right? So clearly, when you go gold open source, we're about to announce something called gold AI, which is exactly that point,
Perfect. It's perfect. Yeah.
right?
So I'll put you back on the plane. So drive to the airport, get on the plane. This time you're sitting next to a federal acquisition professional, maybe working for an agency. And this person turns to you and goes, well, where do I start, Javed? I mean, is there I know there's software requirements, but from an acquisition perspective, how would they specify something, or how would they incorporate some of your innovation into their acquisition of software?
So I mean, one part of it is SBOM mandates are there for every agency right now. So if they want, right, so the simplest place to start is, generate SBOMs for all the software you build or buy. We do both. And or have contractors build, get full visibility into it. So you start with SBOM Manager. So we built the industry's first SBOM Manager in 2022 and have come a long way. So where most federal agencies start with us is, can you assess the software I already have? I have mandates to comply with. Can you help me comply? Right? And so that's the first entry, if you will, right? And then you go, okay, so now that I'm compliant, one other saying I have is every hacked company is a compliant company. Because, right, so once you check the compliance boxes, you want to real security. The question then is, so what does that journey look like for you, right? And ultimately, as AI-generated code and third-party and open source code become increasingly large parts of it, that's an area that has not been managed by almost any software development organization till now. Right. So that's the gap, that's the opportunity. And that's, of course, for companies and organizations and federal government to start building better software, is to start with a more secure base. But the first stuff, of course, is SBOM management. Let's start there, is what I normally say.
I started this podcast talking about Billington, and you had a standing room only room in Billington. So there may be people who are listening to this saying, well, maybe we can partner with Lineage. Maybe we can speak to you guys and learn more, or find out where this all fits in our mix. And I think there's events coming up. Are you guys partnering with Carahsoft, an event later on this month? Or?
Yes. So Carahsoft is an amazing partner. We have we have been partnering with them almost from day one. To again, for the federal space, and the exercise that you saw is what we call a tabletop exercise, where we try to take people through exactly this. How do you go about looking at the software supply chain? It's a hands-on exercise. So we're doing one at Carahsoft on January 30th, 2026. So we'd love to extend that invitation to all your viewers, right?
And what I'll do is
hosted by Carahsoft and us.
Yeah. And everyone knows Carahsoft. They're in Reston. Parking's real easy. And if you're listening to this podcast and walking your dog or out at the bowling alley or something, what I'll do is I'll put a link to that event in the show notes. It's the 30th of January. Easy to find, great parking. The people are wonderful at Carahsoft. And then you can sit in there and actually test something out and maybe answer your own question. I mean, there are people listening to this maybe say, I want to take a look first and maybe touch and play with this but Carahsoft is a nice vendor neutral place. It's huge. You've been there, haven't you?
Yeah, I have been. We actually have a little office inside Carahsoft. Carahsoft has been an amazing host for us. They're the center of our DC activity. We love working with them. Yeah,
it's great. So I will put that in the show notes note. You can expand further on this. But I think I didn't realize that you were the first SBOM folks in 2022 for the federal government. That's something that hasn't been publicized. But maybe this podcast will get the word out and people will find out more and say, well, this is a way to save money and increase security. And we'll look forward to this gold announcement coming up, huh? When's it coming up? This first quarter, 26? When?
It will be very soon, John.
Very soon. That sounds like one of my kind of answers. Very, very soon. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Javed Hasan, co-founder and CEO of a company called Lineaje. Thanks, Javed.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure to join you.